All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to look at a historical figure you've literally known about your entire life, but we're flipping the script. We're looking at George Washington, not just as the guy in the powdered wig crossing a frozen river, but as a modern executive. Think about it. He was essentially the founder, taking the helm of an incredibly volatile, totally underfunded, and unstructured organization. He was, in every sense of the word, the ultimate startup CEO. Let's explore exactly how he pulled this off.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this for a second. You're the CEO of a brand new startup. You've gone out and hired the absolute smartest, most brilliant minds available to be your top executives. Sounds great, right? Well, there's a catch. They have totally, fundamentally different visions for the future of the company, and honestly, they absolutely despise each other. How do you handle that? How do you keep the whole thing from just tearing itself apart? Because believe it or not, that is the exact situation Washington had to deal with.
To see how he handled it, we'll hit 5 key areas today: the ultimate startup CEO, assembling the first boardroom, managing the Hamilton-Jefferson rivalry, the power of restraint, and finally, the exit strategy.
Part 1. The Ultimate Startup CEO.
So let's set the scene and look at the actual state of this company when Washington took over as its first real chief executive. Spoiler alert, the pre-1789 United States was not exactly a well-oiled machine. Under the old Articles of Confederation, the organization was suffering from incredibly weak leadership. There wasn't even an executive branch to enforce anything, just a tiny bureaucracy of clerks. And the financials? Total nightmare. They were saddled with massive war debt, the paper money was virtually worthless, and the central government literally did not have the power to collect taxes. Washington actually called the whole setup a rope of sand. They were basically on the verge of anarchy. So having a strong, decisive executive, that wasn't a luxury. It was absolutely critical for survival. So why was he the right guy for the job? Well, to put his management scale into perspective, just think about the number 11,000. Before the presidency, Washington managed an army of 11,000 men during that brutal winter at Valley Forge. He led them through rampant disease, near starvation, rock-bottom morale, and the constant threat of desertion. And he didn't just keep them from bailing, he transformed them into a highly disciplined force. Talk about unparalleled crisis leadership, right? He knew exactly how to hold a super fragile organization together when the wheels were completely falling off. Moving on to part 2, assembling the first boardroom. Listen, no CEO can run a massive enterprise totally solo. Washington had to nail his talent acquisition strategy, and he was famously an incredible judge of character. Remember, the Constitution didn't even mandate this advisory body. Washington built it from scratch. For C-suite, he brings in Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton at Treasury, Henry Knox for War, and Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. Now, this lineup shows the sheer, undeniable talent he gathered. But look closely at those ideologies. You've got the seeds of the Jeffersonian Republicans sitting right across the table from the founder of the Federalist Party. It was a total powerhouse of intellect, for sure, but it was also a powder keg just waiting to go off. All right, part 3, managing the Hamilton-Jefferson rivalry. And this brings us to the real meat of our case study: how to navigate the fierce, bitter factionalism that inevitably pops up between your top, highly opinionated executives. We really have to understand just how fundamentally opposed these two were. On one side, you've got Alexander Hamilton at the Treasury. He forms the Federalist Party, wants to promote national credit, and envisions a heavily centralized, financially powerful nation. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum is Thomas Jefferson at the State Department. He founds the Jeffersonian Republicans and vehemently opposes basically Hamilton's entire financial agenda. And they are sitting in the same room, reporting to the same guy, with completely opposing roadmaps. The tension was just off the charts. So how exactly did Washington manage this without losing his mind? He used some incredibly precise conflict management tactics. Step 1, he remained officially nonpartisan. In fact, he's the only U.S. president to ever do that for his entire run. Step 2, he strictly restricted cabinet discussions to topics of his choosing. He simply didn't let meetings turn into these ideological free-for-alls. And step 3, once he finally made a call, even if it favored one side, which, let's be honest, often meant Hamilton's financial plans, he expected total agreeable execution from all his department heads. Let me just pause here. How often do you restrict meeting topics just to keep a divided room on track? It is literally a masterclass in executive focus.
Part 4. The power of restraint.
You know, what Washington understood better than almost anyone is that true executive authority doesn't just come from dominance. It comes from the discipline of restraint. Being the very first president, he knew every single thing he did would set a permanent precedent. The Senate actually wanted to give him these majestic titles, things like His Majesty or His Highness the President. I mean, crazy, right? But Washington actively pushed back. He chose a remarkably simple, grounded title, Mr. President. He was deliberately setting a precedent of Republican leadership, basically saying, hey, the executive is a citizen stepping up to serve, not a king sitting on a throne.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how he viewed his veto power. Washington wrote, "I give my signature to many bills with which my judgment is at variance." Just think about the incredible restraint that takes. He didn't just slap a veto on a bill because he personally wasn't a fan of it. He held back, prioritizing the stability and the function of this newly formed government over his own personal preferences. He let the system actually work.
We even see this restraint in his salary. Believe it or not, Washington actually wanted to work for free, just like he did when he was commander of the army. But Congress insisted the office needed a salary to be established properly, and they set it at $25,000 a year. And Washington? He just accepted it. Why? Because he was willing to accept structural norms that were way bigger than his own ego. He wasn't just playing the hero. He was building an institution that had to keep functioning long after some wealthy landowner wasn't the one sitting behind the desk.
Which brings us to part 5, the exit strategy.
The ultimate executive move isn't just about how you lead. It is absolutely about how you leave, making sure the organization can survive without you. Let's look at his timeline. He's unanimously elected in 1789. Fast forward to 1793, his first term ends. He is exhausted, in poor health, and just desperately wants to go home to Mount Vernon. But the startup was still way too fragile. Actually, both Hamilton and Jefferson, who, remember, can't stand each other, both begged him to stay, warning the whole thing would fall apart without him. So, reluctantly, he takes a unanimous re-election. But by 1796, he draws a hard line. He publishes his farewell address, and in 1797, he deliberately retires. He didn't legally have to leave, but he knew walking away was the only way to set the most important precedent of all, a peaceful, democratic transfer of power. Before he officially walked out the door, though, he left a capstone document. In his 1796 farewell address, he wrote that the name of American must always exalt the just pride of patriotism. But what's really crucial here is that he explicitly warned against the dangers of political parties and geographical divisions. He was giving this final stark warning against the exact same partisanship and factionalism he had just spent 8 exhausting years managing in his own cabinet. He knew, without a doubt, it was the biggest threat to the startup's long-term survival.
And really, that brings us to the core lesson of this entire explainer. George Washington wasn't just a military general. He was a brilliant organizational architect. He managed massive egos. He set enduring precedents through incredible restraint. And he knew exactly when it was time to step away. So looking at his example, the big question you have to ask yourself is this: are you building a team and a structure that can actually outlast your own leadership? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope it sparked some curiosity and gave you a completely new perspective on the